Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hello to everyone listening around the world. Welcome to another Pi Live discussion. Today, I've got the absolute pleasure to be joined by Debbie McKeegan of Texintel, Alex Marcel of Liberty Fabrics, Luke Langford and Nick Langford of AVA CAD CAM. Welcome.
Hi, everybody.
Hello. Hello. A couple of bits of housekeeping first and foremost. So I'm sure everyone's an absolute professional at this already, but there is a Q&A button and we are going to be answering questions throughout this. So if you have any questions for the total panel or individuals, please go in there and ask them as soon as you have that question ready. And for anyone that's interested, this will be made available on demand within 36 hours of this, so give us by the end of the week to put the video together and we'll send it out to all registrants and it will also go on to our social channels as well. Look, let's do a couple of introductions just first and foremost. Everyone knows who you are, but I think it'd be really good for people to know which angle you're approaching today's conversation. Obviously, we're talking about the digital revolution that's driving sustainability in printed textiles and for the fashion and apparel sector as well. So, Debbie, if you wouldn't mind kicking us off and saying which angle you're approaching today's conversation from.
Sure, absolutely. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining. I am actually both a textile designer and a digital manufacturer, so I come very much from the print side and the design side of the industry.
Fantastic. Alex, if you wouldn't mind as well.
Hi to everyone. Pleasure to join. I'm approaching from a brand point of view, sourcing partner for many brands in the world of textile prints.
Fantastic. Nick as well.
Well, I guess we are now. My early career was in the textile and the apparel industry, but now we are a technology provider, and so we're approaching it from trying to get people more interested and aware of the potential power of digital technology.
And Luke as well, I believe that you're going to sort of set the scene for today's conversation a little bit.
Exactly that, yeah. So I won't be taking part in the panel discussion, just setting the scene for the conversation.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to make you the host now, and you will be able to sort of share your screen and just give people a little overview of what we're going to cover today. Fantastic. There you are.
See that? Yeah.
Yep.
Great.
Good to go.
Global fashion and supply chains have experienced a series of shocks in recent weeks, and the pandemic has exposed a fragile system. Scrutiny of the sector's negative environmental impact has already forced some brands and their supply chains to change. On top of that, we're now seeing significant financial and security concerns as the brand leadership teams suck up the cost of dormant stock being written off, and in some cases that's millions of pounds, and consider how to improve the complex and inefficient logistics of their supply chains to both recover fast, so to get supplies back in store, but also to future-proof their operations against another similarly catastrophic event. So what will it take to get the fashion and textile industries not just back on track, but also in a more efficient, sustainable, and secure state? I would suggest that a fusion of new technology and skilled people lies at the heart of the recovery and transformation. And in the next few minutes, I'm going to briefly outline the technology that's now available and the solution that these two elements present. So how did we get here? Many fashion and textile businesses moved production offshore to low-cost markets during the final decades of the 20th century. This strategy has delivered lower labour and unit costs, but it also brings some problems with it. Very long lead times and consequently high stockholding and dormancy costs, excessive transport, and mills typically match targets sent to them by buyers using trial and error. This has the effect of lengthening lead times further and causes enormous additional waste, material sent to landfill, pollution, excess usage of dyes and contamination of water, and cost. Recent years have seen increased concern at the environmental as well as financial impact of such sourcing policies. Many top brand owners now have an environmental director in place who is required to report regularly to shareholders on progress made in reducing the environmental footprint of the business. So against this background, in the specific context of printed textiles, what is the enabling technology that we want to talk about? Firstly, digital printing. I'm sure everyone watching is aware of digital printing, which has evolved rapidly over the last 10 years. The machines have got bigger and faster, and the cost of consumables, so the inks, the dyes, and the print heads, have fallen dramatically. Secondly, and this is really the new and exciting bit, is software advances. So without specialist software, the efficient application of digital printing technology to high-end home furnishing or fashion apparel textile printing is severely limited and often results in disappointing and expensive mistakes. What is needed is accurate color management of the design itself, not just your 100% color swatches, all the way through the computer monitor on which the original design is created or scanned, put into repeat, color separated, and recolored. Small digital textile printers on which samples or concepts can be printed for evaluation. Larger digital printers for bulk production and/or analog production. So the latest software achieves this by modeling the whole process on the final output, what our panelists will refer to today as production color management, or PCM for short. So if a product is only to be digitally printed, this means modeling the output, taking into account printer settings, available color gamut, the tonal breakdown of ink, fabric to be printed on, etc., on the final bulk digital printer, and making everything beforehand match that. If, however, some of the production will be conventionally or rotary screen printed, then the modeling process is based on the analog production, and all digital prints, whether for sampling or short production runs, will be made to match the predicted analog outcome. In short, this is done by gathering and storing production data, and then using that to model using complex algorithms to give a digital prediction of what the final outcome will be on the analog press, using a particular set and combination of substrate, inks, and dyes on a particular machine setup. And the more data there is, the more accurate the digital prediction will be. Now, I'd suggest that that's a pretty cool color-managed environment to work in for anyone who is used to the delays, disappointment, and cost that comes from guesswork and trial and error. And I'd even suggest that this software, or PCM, is the crucial link between digital and analog printing. I also suggested earlier that people are as important a part of the solution as technology. Specialist software requires specialist training and multilingual support. Technology is only as good as the people using it. And this support is what 2/3 of AVA's team, in our case, provide. It's inevitable that businesses with many decades of experience of developing and manufacturing products in a certain way are nervous about the relative leap into the unknown represented by digital technology. But expertise and support is accessible. And we also know that acquiring new skills can be empowering for employees and result in increased loyalty and reduced staff turnover, which is a particular problem in some developing markets. So, accurate digital printing of samples and concepts, so giving a reliable match to eventual bulk production, will benefit almost every business. There are still undoubtedly challenges for some businesses. However, the potential benefits are very significant. Vastly reduced lead times will lead to significant falls in stock and dormancy costs. The ability to conduct extended market trials and replenish stockouts quickly and in limited quantities will mean increased sales for some businesses. And moving closer to right first time, digital and analog printing will significantly reduce waste and pollution in a measurable way. So my closing pitch to the panel is that now is the time to re-examine whether these benefits of adopting digital technology and potentially a hybrid manufacturing strategy now make it worth overcoming the remaining obstacles. Over to you guys.
Thanks, Luke. Yeah, really, really interesting question there. And, you know, I think it is the time. And really, this is all about transformation, right? You know, this is what we're seeing across many sort of subsectors within the industry. I think it'd be interesting to sort of talk about very briefly sort of some of the main drivers of this transformation. Nick, what do you feel that those are right now?
I think some of the three main groups of drivers, some of them have always been there, but there are particular reasons why they're coming into particular focus now. So I'd say the first group of drivers are financial. So the good news is that no one's going to be asking businesses to do things that don't make financial sense. And by that I mean that clearly there were good, sound business reasons for people to take the offshoring decisions in the first place. They needed those lower unit costs. But as Luke mentioned, there are obviously big financial downsides to that, and people have perhaps become more aware of the balance between those, with huge amounts of wastage and stock being generated, so that there are financial downsides to the offshoring strategy. The second group of drivers, I would say, is around sustainability, which again Luke mentioned, but again they've always been there, but I think it's be fair to say that they're much more in focus now because consumers and shareholders are forcing big brand owners to focus on this issue. We don't need to go into it. Everyone is aware of the figures. The global textile industry's performance is horrible in terms of sustainability. And I think that businesses are now being forced to focus on that. And if we look at the positive side, they're being rewarded by their consumers when they do successfully focus on that. And the third, so financial sustainability, but the third group of drivers, I would say, which is much more current and topical and new, is concern with supply chain security. And I think that has obviously been driven by the pandemic. Some businesses are now in the unfortunate position that perhaps consumers are just about starting to come back and think about spending money, but they can't actually get the right stuff in the stores because their supply chain, which is weeks long, can't react fast enough. So pandemic has woken us up. Obviously, there could be another pandemic or another catastrophic world disrupting event, a war or whatever. And I think that's working in tandem, perhaps at the moment, with the political global trade concern factor, where I think 20 years ago, perhaps everyone imagined that the world was moving smoothly towards a happy family, free trading world. And perhaps there are various things going on now that are making people think that, that might not always be the case. And so how do businesses protect against potential disruptions caused by trade barriers or political events?
Yeah, I mean, that is certainly a pretty large concern. We're certainly not at that utopia yet. Debbie, as Nick suggested, some of these issues were already present, right?
Yeah, that's right. The industry has been struggling for a long time. I think really perhaps since the crash of 2008, there hasn't really been much reform within the industry, and yet consumer behaviour has changed so much. And the industry is challenged now by design diversity, a constant need for newness, a constant need to keep replenishing collections at great speed, and that has put huge pressure on the system. As Nick said, when you're ordering large quantities from abroad, it's very difficult to move those at speed and to deliver the right product at the right time. And I think, that's one of the main reasons currently that the fashion industry has a poor reputation for landfill, really. We are still producing far too much waste and need to take absolute control of what we make right at the very beginning.
Alex, you work with a sort of truly global network there. I mean, vast. It must make for quite an interesting breadth of knowledge. Do you find that you're hearing different things from different people about the current challenges?
So today what we see is what Nick was saying before. It's in the actual situation, we can say that the plans has gone faster for everyone. So it helped people make decisions that some other times were tough. Main thing that also what David was, we see that people is going more for flexibility. So this is the point. I think that fashion, now we will see what happens in the future. I think that it's changing a little bit again. But until yesterday, you can say, until when all this started, people was going for main productions and then more flexibility. I think my personal thinking is that this is going to go even further nowadays, because people doesn't know, they don't know the forecast today, how much or what you are going to sell in the store next year. People doesn't know what we are seeing today is that we are already presenting now, starting to present a winter 21. So people doesn't know, is not able to do the forecast of what is going to happen with summer. They need to go to get rid of all the stock for nothing, which goes against the sustainable proposals that everyone has today, because everyone it's taking memberships of different organizations and different actions to control to monitor the sustainability and to be more sustainable. So it's a little bit of uncertainty, and then we see that the technology and so we were saying will help to do, we think, that shorter productions.
Yeah. It's interesting, that contrast right now between us all having this sort of massive focus on being more sustainable, yet the sort of stark realization that so many garments have been produced because they were planned last year. And so it's already all happened. And we just kind of have to forget about 2020 in regard. And, it's quite a strange contrast there. Let's talk more about the future and forget 2020 and think, all right, well, what can we do? What tools and what processes can we implement now to support this transformation? Because it's not a short-term thing, it is a very long-term thing. Debbie, I'm going to come to you first on that. What are some of the things that we can start doing to support this transformation?
I think we have to start moving towards digitizing the entire supply chain wherever you can, subject to your own business model. Implement those changes, whether you can do it in one whole line or gradually implement those changes. And from a design perspective, the most important thing there is that to make sure that you always design the product correctly right at the very beginning. So you become more acutely aware of the issues of sustainability and you design them into the actual product. So you are creating hybrid design too, depending whether you're working directly with a mill or whether you're working directly as a freelance designer. And don't forget, so much of our industry now is also freelance. So it's really important that from the design perspective, designers are creating patterns and prints in the right format so that they can be utilized for twin production. And I think that's going to be a huge part of the future. I think we are going to see a massive swing towards reshoring or nearshoring. And in order to do that, you have to have created the product correctly right at the very beginning. So, I'm not just talking about, it's a whole suite of technologies, really, whether you're creating the pattern or the print, preparing the print for digital print, making sure you're embedding color. Color is one of the most important parts of this journey. It's so, so, so important. You get the colour wrong at the beginning, you're going to produce far too many samples, which is creating waste. And then in a production environment, you know, once you start talking about big rotary machines, or equally, you know, the bolt machines, digital machines printing at 90 square meters a minute, you're creating a lot of waste if you do not control color, you know, and a good professional designer with a great expertise using fantastic software can do that right from the very beginning, but it's a discipline we have to put back into the system. I think many years ago, using other technologies, we could get a little bit lazy about that. And digital is kind of seen as a really easy process, drag and drop, press a button. But, you know, digital textiles is textiles. There's a lot under the hood, and there's a lot of technology and a lot of thought and process. And we have to get back to doing that really very, very well from the beginning, and priming that product for a really smooth, sustainable production workflow.
Yeah. Alex, would you come in on that sort of color management from the very beginning of the design stage?
Yes, I would say that I'm glad that Debbie is saying this, because now I feel better, because I think that we are doing the correct things as she was mentioning. So because of Liberty, the characteristic that we have, who know us, they know what we are. We are recognized for the prints that we have been doing for 140 years. But the main thing that we are recognized for is the color management that we have. So today we have, I think we have 20 designers in the UK, and then another 4 in Japan. Then we have a team in China, and we have also a team in South America, where different production facilities. So it means that and the boss in our division is not the sales team, is not me as the business director. It's the design team. So we are pretty lucky to be a company that it's managed by design team. Means that they start the creation of the collection. So we create collections with a creative director, and then she creates the collection with her team, and then we follow that. So it means that they got inspired for one theme, and each season they change it, and then afterwards they do the strike offs and all the process that was shown before earlier in the presentation by Luke. So then here what we have is that the headquarters, we are in London. Our facilities and our printing facilities that we own, it's in Como in Italy. So that means that here you have already the first challenge, that is the design team is separated of the production team. So it's what Debbie was saying, that you need a very straightforward, very clear line of working in terms of color that everyone follows from the beginning till the production, and then till the end consumer, so till the brand. Lucky for us is what we were saying earlier, the technology to us, it helps, and then we are lucky that everyone is using the same software, the same technology in the different parts of the world. So this always helps. And then is what Debbie was saying, the color management. To be able nowadays to have programs that you have the same color in the screen that you have it afterwards in the fabric or in the CAD, in the paper, always there is not so straightforward. There are always some things to tune. It helps, and it's much better than 20 years ago when all this didn't exist, and then you have everything to do it by hand. So this is how we see it, and we are pretty succeeding.
Nick, would you come in on also, I'd like to ask about sort of the difference between sort of digital and analog here, and trying to find this sort of consistent color management on both of those.
Yeah, I was going to pick up. I mean, Debbie mentioned hybrid manufacturing, by which I understood that she's talking about where manufacturing is both digital and analog. And Alex didn't mention it, but I know that he does it. He's currently using AVA technology, and they switch they use both rotary and digital production. Liberty is perhaps not the best case because it's to discuss as a case study, because they're far more advanced in that they're working with I think that's the way of the future, because I think having whether you don't necessarily have to own your production facilities in the future, but I think that we'll see brand owners taking a much greater degree of responsibility, which will mean working with a smaller number probably and having a much closer technical relationship with their suppliers, even if they don't own them, rather than, you know, some of them currently working with thousands of suppliers and just switching between them from day to day on the basis of presumably primarily price, which precludes any degree of control or responsibility. And I think that the sustainability lobby is now sort of saying to them, you can't get away with that anymore. You actually, Mr. Brand Owner, you are actually responsible, in inverted commas, for the waste and the damage being done by some of those suppliers. But to pick up on your question, David, analog and digital, yes, I think that's absolutely key to this discussion. We all get very excited about digital technology. You go to any conference or trade show, and a lot of the talk is about digital because that's the new stuff. People don't want to talk about the old stuff that's been the same for 30 years. But I often mention, a key figure here, I think, is that the best estimates that I've seen, which I think is fairly consistently accepted, is that roughly 4% of printing in textile printing in 2019 was digital, 4%. And yes, the industry is growing impressively. We're talking about double-digit growth, maybe 17% compound growth, but that takes us to 7% in 2023. So whilst we're all excited about digital technology, and it's obviously what my company provide, I think it's got to be very much a discussion about how software in particular can provide the bridge between analog and digital, because in 2023, 90% of production is still going to be analog unless all the experts are wrong. Nobody's suddenly going to throw all those rotary screen presses in the sea, and they do still make sense for higher volume. So I think the clever manufacturing strategy is going to be one which can play the best of both worlds. As Debbie said, it could be different product lines, or potentially it could even be the same product line with digital at the beginning through the sampling, maybe even extended sampling, maybe even in-store trials in flagship stores to make sure that they identify the winner seller lines, then some bulk production, taking advantage of the lower costs, and then maybe at the end of the product life cycle, digital again to deal with stockouts, which currently are lost sales because they can't afford, and they haven't got the time anyway, to reactivate the bulk supply chain. So I think that role of software to allow digital and conventional to match more easily, as Luke said. I mean, the current process, it couldn't be much worse. Typically, obviously not the case for Liberty, but very often the process is literally designer in London or New York or Madrid or wherever produces something very pretty using typically Adobe Photoshop, and that becomes the target. And then the manufacturers are told, make this. And nobody has any idea how to make it, or even whether it's physically possible to make it, given the combination of chosen substrate, the printing process, and the inks and dyes being used. And so what happens at the moment, or what typically has happened, is it's done by trial and error, as Luke says. That's incredibly wasteful, extends lead times further, causes masses of totally unnecessary waste, and they may not even get there in the end anyway. But the days when the suppliers didn't care because they basically said, that the brand owners didn't care because they said, that's your problem, Mr. Manufacturer, and one of the 1,000 manufacturers would crack it and come up with an acceptable price, and the pain is all on the supplier side. And I think maybe that's going to change a bit.
Yes, sorry, Nick, that I didn't mention it, but yes. So we are happy users of AVA, and then I have to say that actually what you were saying is disappointing. Then at Liberty, one of the keys of why we are succeeding, we have to say that we are quite pretty okay in fabrics about what we are doing is what I was saying, the flexibility, but not also for our customers, but also for ourselves. So when you were mentioning about digital, and then here we are talking about the digital process. Actually, we're a company that we are printing more than around 60%, between 60 and 70% of our production is in rotary. So that means that with kind of some software, you can choose at the end which one of the two technologies you want to use, depending on the quantities that you want to launch. The advantage of this is that you choose where you would do it and how you do it, and then the speed that you are going to achieve it. That's true. And then this is our secret recipe, that it's because we do it in-house, and then because we own a factory, so we know the technicals about it. So we just make the investment to have a single pass machine. This obviously is expensive, but we don't have it as it comes from the manufacturers. So we alter all the machines to achieve the result that we want. So at the end, it's the same that you do with your car, you do it with the textile machines. So everything that we have is custom made and it's tweaked for our technicians in Italy, in Stamperia, Olonia, that they are the magicians of happening. It's true, and then this is the point that you were saying. When you have the ability to start from the beginning, from the design, and then obviously I don't think that Photoshop allows to do it for my lack of knowledge of technology, but in terms of software. But you cut the design in different layers the number of cylinders and all that. At the end, you can choose what you can do at the end of the process. Today is 7% the digital that you were saying, the production in digital. I don't have the data, but it's true that you see that even in China. I was there last year to see some different things in terms of a strategy, and then we went to factories, and someone was showing me the same machines that we were having, and I was saying, look, we have the same machines than you, so we can produce the same than you. And we were saying, well, not because you have a Ferrari, you are able to drive it. So in this case, here's what you are saying, that one thing is you need to have the setup, but also is the hands. So I think that it's more about a mentality, and that people need to believe that the end product that they want to deliver, it's the correct one, maybe the standard, that the one that just produce it, that depends on what your customer requires.
Which brings us to the people question, doesn't it? Which as Alex put it, just because you've got a Ferrari doesn't mean you can drive it. Or as Luke put it, the technology is only as good as the people using it.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of this, which shouldn't be ignored. I mean, it is scary for businesses that perhaps have seen surprisingly little. Many of them have very proud histories going back 100, 200 years, and perhaps in manufacturing terms, they've seen very little revolutionary change. And perhaps the major strategic change, the last major strategic business change, was the one back in, which for some of them was in the 1970s or 80s, which is when they moved production offshore. And since then, they probably haven't, seen a lot of change. And so suddenly threatening them with a revolution, it must be scary. And I think businesses like ours have to be very aware of that, and of the need to support and guide people through change, and basically provide unlimited support and help and constant training. It's not quality of training. It's not a one-off thing that you buy the Ferrari and you get taught to drive it. It's more complex because this Ferrari changes every year. The surrounding technology, as we all know, is moving at the speed of light. So we talk about lifelong learning, whatever, but it's the fact that employees staff, all the people need to be constantly studying and being retrained and given new tools and new technology and new support. But as Luke said, that can be suddenly something that was scary suddenly becomes rather motivating, and people, it's certainly not a case of only for the young. People who've maybe perhaps been getting a little bit bored with their job after 20 years leap at it and say, yeah, this is really exciting. People are teaching me new skills, and suddenly I feel much more empowered and much more part of the process than I did before.
Yeah, Debbie, have you been seeing that as well?
Yeah, I think the industry itself has a responsibility to share knowledge. I think if you were to look from textile design, I think you have a generational issue in that, you know, there aren't that many designers out there that have had the opportunity to have hands-on experience within the analog and the digital frame. So I think it's really, really important, as Nick said, you know, when you talk about constant learning, it's like it's constant perfection, it's constant tweaking, it's adapting software and technologies to new innovations within print or within any other of the manufacturing processes within the whole supply chain. So yeah, I would definitely agree. I think we have to invest in more knowledge, we have to keep learning. And I think, you know, those are all very, very all achievable for all freelance designers out there. I know Nick and AVA have lots and lots of freelance designers using their technology who are creating, you know, production ready. I think that's one of the important words here, production ready designs that then can be sold and move on through the production supply chain, however they're going to be utilized. I think it's very, very important that we do make sure that we're creating production ready professional files right at the very beginning. And also as well, you know, virtual color management, virtual design, working with the mills, all of those technologies are getting so much easier to use. Collaborating screens in remote locations, as Alex said, you know, you can pass off a color in London on something that's being printed in Italy if you have taken the trouble to calibrate all of your screens, etc., in all locations. You can actually have trust then in the system that you have built, and also be confident that you're creating patterns of prints using the colors that are available in the print palette too, whether that is for analog or whether that is for digital production, depending on which ink sets you're using. It's really important right at the very beginning, if you're working as a production designer, that you make sure that everything you create is in gamut and you don't cause a nasty surprise, you know, for the printer, you know, such as Alex, who will be given a file by a designer who will say, I need exactly that red, but you couldn't make that red in pigment, never mind, or reactive, never mind digital. So it's very important that we do share knowledge, lots and lots of learning online, lots and lots of communication, collaboration, to make sure that everybody within the whole supply chain is armed with the right knowledge and the right details to produce the correct files.
I want to get on to a few questions because we've got them building up now, so I'm going to get into a couple of them. The first one that got asked about 10 minutes ago, and I'm not going to come to you, Nick, on this because I think you might be biased in the answer, but what is the best software to use in order to achieve the highest color management quality control for digital printing? Alex, I'm going to come to you. What would you say as a user of AVA yourself as well?
Well, for what I know that what I see in our design studios, what it's normal people that comes, right? And I see that people work with Photoshop, some of them, and they are pretty okay with that. I know that technically this is something that when you go in detail, as I was saying, then I think I asked already, I put a disclaimer that I'm not the correct person for this, but I know that you cannot separate by layers, and then it's when you go to the technical part of it, it gets difficult. Then I know that in the market, for what I see, I think there is AVA, which the one that we use, but I know that there is another French brand that also they have pretty similar system, and then I think that I would suggest that the people, what they need to do is to check and then test it. And nowadays, the technology also is something that it's easy because you can try it, you can test it, and then if you like it, you subscribe, and then you work with it. So I think that each company will have their own their way of working, and someone will adapt better than the other one.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can say that others are available, but AVA probably is the answer to that.
For us, yes, obviously. Yes, so.
Can I answer that question? Can I
you
have
can,
another go
Debbie,
at that
please.
one?
Yeah, go on.
I think it very much depends. I think you have to understand your own business model too, and also if you're looking, depends where you are in this process. If the question was spoken as a designer, then it very much depends on your customers, your clients, or are you just creating designs for yourself with your own style? What is your style? You know, there are huge differences in print, and people perhaps don't understand this, between printing flat color and then taking it all the way to the other end. And once you start going up towards graduated tones, tonal four-longs, all of those things, so you need a much more sophisticated software. So I think you have to be careful right from the beginning that you really look at the boundaries of the software that you choose.
Okay, brilliant. Nick, there's some people asking about where they can access the study about rotary versus digital. They're saying there's very interesting data shared. So those figures that you came up with earlier about the compound growth, double-digit compound growth, and the move from, was it 4% to 7%, something like that?
Yeah, well, I think I would say, I have them in my head now, but I'm pretty sure that I would have got them from WTIN, I think, which most of the people will be aware of. Mm-hmm. I also think Debbie probably knows, because I think I watched a recent presentation of Debbie's, and I think you used pretty much those figures, Debbie. Do you know where you...
Somewhere between. Lots of different places. So it could be McKinsey. We don't typically quote WTIN, but other places as well. Yeah. So we always do. Whenever we pull our stats through, they're always a balance, a mix of lots of different ones. So it really tries to give an overall view, not just pointed from one direction. But it's around between 4% and 7%.
Yeah, I think I haven't seen anything to suggest that it's anywhere near double figures percentage-wise yet. So that's that, and that's really the point that I'm making, is just to say, well, if it's less than 10%, then that means there's a hell of a lot of analog printing out there. So the correlation of digital sampling or a hybrid manufacturing strategy has to be really important.
What's interesting though is that when you look at the adoption of quite a lot of the single pass machines, if you were to look at ITMAR last year, I believe that 5 of the huge single pass machines that were sold went to Pakistan for high speed production. And that's a really interesting trend. That's really interesting, because what that shows is that speed of production, and I don't mean speed per meters, I mean speed to an order. So how quickly can you get 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 meters to a mill from the east to the west, or to the CMT house, wherever it's going? That is changing completely. And I think for me, that's where I think you'll also see a key change in the environment, especially post-COVID, where companies, whether they're working in fashion or interiors, wherever they are, have to be really cute about how much stock they're holding. So they're going to want to call fabric faster and faster and faster. And then I think you're going to really see huge acceleration in the adoption of digital printing technology post-COVID, without question.
In addition of what you are saying, Debbie, I would say that in our case, for example, this is good what you were saying, because the difference that we feel between, obviously we have both technologies in the factory, and then we just go to this single pass you were saying. And in ITMA, it's true, I was there in Barcelona actually, and then you were seeing a lot of people from East and Far East buying machines and then interested on that. Because as I was saying before, I don't know where this data comes. Well, I know that this data comes, and McKinsey also shows it. But the reality is that in Europe, all the machines, I would suggest, I think that the machines that people is buying are digital, while in Far East are still rotary, because the rotary machine, the only advantage that you have is the workforce. So obviously it's not the same one European salary that one salary in Pakistan, Bangladesh, or even in China. But the reality is that every time that we change one design or one production in our factory, in the rotary machine, in the analog machine, it takes us 1 hour to set up the machine. while in the single pass, you just didn't stop the machine. It's incredible. It's just like the print of your that you have at home that prints one page in red and the next one is in blue. Obviously, this is something that it brings a lot of flexibility that we were saying at the end, much less wastage because you don't need to pass again and all that and waste that 100 meters that has the one pass. And then the speed, because nowadays the speeds that they are achieving with these machines are amazing. It's pretty, you have the same speed between digital and conventional. So the only thing that it happens is that the machine is expensive, and then also today, unfortunately, still the ink is a big cost of the machine.
Yeah, but it's heading in the right direction, Alex. I think it's ink prices are going. At least they're going in the right direction.
Well, when you see the biggest printers in the world, that we are not going to say ourselves, if not other colleagues that we have. Obviously, the best industry, the most industry that I know is the Italian. They are using all of them this technology. The most expensive quality, I think, is the Italian printing. Also in Spain, I know that there is. All of them are buying digital machines. This is because something. If not all of us, we will be buying rotary machines.
Yeah, and I think it's worth, as Debbie said, that a lot of the first sales of the really fast single pass machines have been in traditional manufacturing markets, which are a long way away from the UK or North America. But it's also worth saying that the onshoring option, is a lot more feasible because you don't need a huge infrastructure. I mean, if you're building an analog printing mill, you've got a huge infrastructure. You've got to have a certain scale. You've got to have waste disposal, etc., etc. Whereas digital machines, almost by definition, are available in all shapes and sizes. We're talking about the Rolls Royces, the really fast ones, the use of labor is much lower. The waste is almost negligible. You're not churning out pollution and dirty water all over the place. So it is feasible. And I mean, Alex is obviously talking about Italy anyway, rather than Pakistan. But I mean, it could be Leicester. It could be almost anywhere. And it's the combination. The technology obviously has a price. There's a capital cost, but the labor is relatively low, and it's high skilled. And so, and it's, and you would probably want to have the close control over those technicians that are running the machine, because they're going to be core people in the outcome of your product. So that all of those things, to me, speak in favor of people looking at some form of onshoring. But there is, of course, the garment. I think we if we talk about apparel, the bogey lurking in the background is, I can hear an apparel manufacturer saying to me, yeah, well, this is all very good. You're telling me that I can print fabric onshore, or some of my fabric onshore, but that's not going to do me any good if I still have to send the fabric to Bangladesh or wherever to make the garments. So yeah, I'm not an expert on garment manufacture, but you would wonder whether, the drivers are so strong now that is it totally out of the question that people should consider some onshore or nearshore garment manufacturing ability, despite the fact that obviously there is a much higher labor incidence. But I think, some people are already doing it. I think, Debbie, you have some knowledge in this area.
Yeah, definitely. There are, ethical sewing manufacturers here in the UK. Yeah, there are also other companies in Leicester, despite recent news. There's a lot of sewing production here in the UK. Nothing like as much as there used to be, and it will need considerable investment depending on where the scale comes up to. But there's a lot of sewing in Europe as well. So I don't think we'll ever bring production back to the scale that we had in the 90s, where there are certainly huge opportunities for reshoring and nearshoring production, where you control your partnerships, you control your collaborations, really. And I think what you'll see moving forward as well is more partnerships where people actually start to broker production as well. So, you used to see that before, didn't you? And you also see that with Inditex, for example, as well, where they actually invest in a partnership of certain amount of production and they hold that yield. So they hold that slot for a certain amount of hemming, a certain amount of print, a certain amount of everything. But what that is actually going to be will not be defined till 2 or 3 days before it hits production, even the day before production. So you have the capacity always on scale, but the diversity is gathered from the stores and the buyers and what's actually being designed. And there's the studios creating designs and prints and patterns, putting them using 3D renders into existing shapes, but then sending them down to production, so that the shop floor in retail always has new products and new technology to feed a loyal client base. So yeah, all of these things are possible, and it is already happening here in the UK, and in an ethical social enterprise format as well, where there is no slave labour and people are all paid a living wage and enjoy their careers.
But in the end, I think, as Alex was saying when I spoke to him the other day, you would say, Alex, in the end, it all comes down to affordability, doesn't it?
Yes. At the end, I think that what happens nowadays is that in the market, there is a pressure for price. And then people need to understand that it's not the same price to be sustainable than not to be sustainable, than to have a certain quality than not to have it. So obviously this is what people needs to teach the market, needs to teach the consumer, and then we believe on it, and then we succeed on it. But it's true that is still a lot of work to be done in that, because the end consumer nowadays is starting to be sustainable, to turn around the hand tag and check where it's produced, how it's produced. Nowadays, you see in social media, it's many news coming on in terms of here in UK with some brands that had issues in terms of supply chain. It's something going on, and people need to start to be taking care of it.
So, do we feel now that then the responsibility of the behaviour of the suppliers is becoming more and more on the brands and retailers?
I think it is, yeah.
Well, if you ask to us, it's true that in Liberty Group we have nowadays, we are more and more monitored in terms of what is in my side, from the fabric side, from the what is where we produce, where we source, what kind of cotton we source, where technology we use, and then all the materials that we produce. Our factory in Italy, we can say that it's really monitored on that. Also, as a retailer, we are facing that we are part of 2 or 3 organizations that they check how we sell, what are the products that we trade, and then obviously, and this is something that we have seen growing the last 12 months, and I think that in the next 12, it's going to grow exponentially. So I think that people is taking care of, and then is caring of, and then I think it's going to be the next challenge for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of big companies now have a named person at parent board level whose title is something like sustainability or environmental director, whose job is to report to the shareholders every year on the progress that business has made in this area. So they can't do nothing now. They have to start taking responsibility, don't they?
Mm.
Yes, I have to say that it was like this, Nick. Nowadays, you have one CEO, and then in one side it has the legal director, and then in the other side it has the director of social corporate responsibility, and then you don't know who of each one has more empowerment today for them to take the correct decision, because everything is considered. Yes.
We've got a few questions here, and conscious, people can stay on as long as they want. I'm sure we'll get through all the questions if you guys got the time. But we were talking about inks earlier on. I don't think we've spoken about that in great detail today. And one of the questions is, coming to the technologies, which inks do you think will have greatest potential within the sportswear industry when it comes to direct to textile printing or pigment or disperse acid reactive inks? So direct to textile pigment or disperse acid reactive inks. Who wants to come in on that? Hands up.
I'd go for pigments, but I mean, yeah, it's not my business, but I think that stuff that is happening in the development of pigments, which were the last really to come onto the digital printing scene, they were more difficult to handle digitally. I think that there's a lot of exciting stuff happening with pigments now.
Okay.
On almost any substrate. So yeah, sportswear is obviously sometimes very challenging because you get lots of incredibly modern, waterproof, plasticky type things that need to be difficult to print on. But I think there's some very exciting work going on there and incredibly vibrant color gamuts available.
Interesting. Another question here, in hybrid manufacturing, which we did talk about earlier on, and Debbie, I'm going to come to you on this one. In hybrid manufacturing, if the initial bulk is digital and later part of the bulk moves to analog, can they still be consistent in color and quality?
Yes, you have to work closely with your mill and you have to match it back, but it also would depend on the actual printed pattern. It actually depends on the design itself, I think, whether that will transfer over. Definitely, depending on the different graduated tones, how many screens, how much the mill, what the budget is, what you're trying to get to, price per square meter. So yeah, there are lots of different conundrums in there, lots of different things to look at.
There's a follow-up question actually to that from the same person, that can this be applied to piece dyed fabric? And if so, can the total color life cycle be managed electronically?
Piece dye, you mean printing onto dyed fabric?
Can this be applied to piece dyed fabric?
If you, yeah, I think one of the only other ways to do that would be to do it perhaps down the dye sublimation route, where you in a different format really completely, where you can put a layer of white underneath and as an opaque color and print on top. But that isn't something you choose to do in mass production, because it would be expensive and timely, and the final effect wouldn't be exactly what you wanted either.
Yeah, I mean, if I could jump in there as a general, Luke touched on the technology, but yeah, in theory, the technology, PCM as we call it, so production color management, can be applied to any printing process, because all it's doing essentially is starting from the end point and saying, what happens when we print this color on this fabric in this machine with this pre-treatment or whatever. And we're creating a database from that, and then using that to model backwards through the entire digital process. So as long as the digital printer has the right gamut, or as long as the monitor has the right gamut, everything is modeled on what we expect to come out of the analog process. But as Luke said, I mean, the more data you have, the more accurate this process is. Now, in the real world, a lot of textile and apparel producers are not going to be in the perfect world where they can model every little detail of the production process. If we just jump an industry to provide the contrast, large-scale flooring manufacturing. So people who are printing either laminate or direct vinyl flooring or laminated flooring. Now, those are big production lines, and they are controlled, they are owned usually by the brand owners, and they are producing similar designs year in, year out with the same inks on similar substrates. So that, if you like, is the perfect world, because they have a huge amount of data that is relevant that we can put into the AVA software, which means that they can create as many new designs and as many new colors as they like, and it will provide a very, very accurate prediction. most textile producers are never going to be in that because there are more substrates, there are likely to be more different suppliers, although hopefully they will see some narrowing down, because you can't do this if you have 1,000 suppliers and you have no control over them whatsoever. You can't do production color management because you can't get the reliable data to put into the system in the first place to allow the forecasting to happen. But assuming that there's going to be some closer relationship, narrowing down of supply chains, more control, then a degree of this is going to be possible, but probably not the degree that the flooring manufacturer has, because you're still going to have far more new substrates coming in, so you haven't got actual data for that actual substrate, which might be new this season, but you might have something fairly similar in the database. And the point here is that it's not a 100% right or wrong thing that you're looking for. One of the key measures, it has to be measurable. Those directors who are going to report to the shareholders need numbers to prove that what they're doing is actually having an effect. One of the measures that our customers frequently adopt, because it's a figure that they are able to access historically, is basically the number of attempts it takes them on an analog press to match the digital target. In other words, how many times did they get it wrong and throw it away before they got it right? And that number, obviously, it varies hugely according to how top end how difficult the substrate is, where the printing mill is. But I mean, I'm not exaggerating when I say that that number can be as high as 30 attempts to get it right, average. And so a business that is currently taking an average of 30 attempts to get something right, if they can get it down to 15, it still sounds pretty awful, but they've made a huge improvement. So whereas the laminate producers that I'm talking about are probably averaging less than 2 for that figure, so it's between 1 and 2, 1.5 is achievable for them. Textiles aren't going to get to that. But if they can get from 30 down to 20 and then down to 10 and maybe down to 5, that is a hell of a lot of waste. So I don't think a lot of people look at it, you talk to anyone manufacturing and they will say, well, it can't work because we have so many variables in the apparel and fashion industry. And yes, it's true. At the moment, it probably couldn't work because the worst of the variables is they have too many suppliers and they don't have any control over them. But if that starts to narrow down, I believe that, yeah, they won't get to perfection. They won't have the total control that they can say it's going down for every product line. It's going down exactly that product line. I've already got the data for that substrate using that production line. Therefore, I might expect to get it right first time or second time. But if they can get from 30 down to 15, down to 10, down to 5, it's an incremental process. And so I don't think people should let the apparent or perhaps obvious inability to hit perfection put them off trying to improve.
Absolutely. There's a couple of questions here. So what about sublimation? Will that grow?
Yeah, sublimation's good. Sublimation is relatively easy from this point of view in that it's transfer paper is typically gravure printed, and that's kind of where AVA started. So we do a lot of work with gravure printing for flooring, wall coverings, and transfer printing. And for various reasons, production color management is easier for gravure printing than it is for rotary screen printing.
Are any of these color management technologies suitable for measuring color on digitally print yarn? Does that make sense?
Well, I used to work in the yarn business for many years, or rather the thread business. I used to work for Coats Viola. But obviously it's very different from what I do now. So really, we have been here focusing on, and which is why we included it in the title, because clearly there's a vast amount of the apparel industry that doesn't have any print on it. And that's where that question is coming. You know, color is obviously important. Even if your color is one color like this shirt, you probably want to get it the right color. But that is basically not AVA's business. We're dealing specifically with the challenges of printing designs onto textiles rather than just getting them the right color. But there is very interesting color management, color recipe prediction, measurement and prediction technology, which is available. And but I mean that is the field of companies like X-Rite and Great Macbeth and people like that.
Yeah. I'd have a look at our event last year in Lake Majori. There's quite a few suppliers there that dealt with that. There's a question here from Richard, who sort of makes the point really that the point of sale demand, the prices of analog are not pulling through the value add of the higher prices of digital, saying that basically all of his manufacturers that he works with, they can't raise their prices even a quarter of a dollar. That's what they say, at least. So saying that the point of sale demand, the prices of analog are not putting through the value for digital. He goes on to make the question, what steps are you contemplating to coach designers with your software to design into the collection, as we were talking about earlier on, Debbie? Digital value add that will pull through the solutions of digital, because he feels that consumers currently have sort of zero awareness of this digital value add. Does that all make sense? So in terms of feeling like consumers need to have the designers design into the collection, and that will then feed through, trickle down into people using digital printing more than analog to justify the prices. Debbie, would you come in on that?
I think over time this problem will actually disappear. I think, you know, it's, if you, as Nick was saying before, you're talking between 4 and 6 or 7% into digital. It's about economies of scale. I think once you see the adoption within this industry start to build and build and build, the ink prices will start to level off. But you know, they've already moved massively in the last 5 or 6 years. So you'll start to see, do you agree, Alex? You'll start to see the marketplace start to balance out, and that's when you'll see the massive adoption and the big, huge shift over to digital technologies, because you know they are very sustainable, green, lots and lots and lots of issues, not greedy on energy, save a huge amount of electricity, etc., compared to analog productions. So yeah, I think there are economies of scale. There are huge operational benefits using digital technologies as opposed to analog, especially when you start talking about reshoring and when you talk about the economies of not holding stock and releasing working capital and 1,001 other things. But I think depending on the company's business model, you know, those have to be drilled down, those have to be pulled out. And I think, you know, this kind of systemic change that the fashion industry requires now is really from a CEO level. It has to come down from the top, and it has to be rationalized. Yeah, and I think, you know, you can't compare necessarily like for like all of the time. You have to look at the bigger picture. But I do have great sympathy. Margin within textiles is not a new issue. Margin within textiles has always been a point of contention. It's a long established trade.
But I think on an optimistic note, I think perhaps there's, you know, the demographics and the long-term trend is perhaps moving in the right direction. In that, you know, I listen to my children, and I think, you know, there is a genuine movement away from the throwaway culture, and I wouldn't be surprised if the trend in apparel consumption in, let's say, the first world, in Europe and North America for sure, is over time, I don't know how fast it'll happen, but I think we could see lower volume, so less units consumed, but of higher quality and at higher price, crucially for Alex and the person who asked the question. Yeah, that the higher price is obviously, you know, are the young people prepared to pay a bit more for something which they know is sustainably produced, but also is probably of better quality, will last longer, is going to be recycled, whatever. And I think probably in the longer term, the answer is to that question, I would say, listening to the young people I talk to, is probably yes.
Alex?
Yes, I would say that this is how you say it's the big question. Actually, that is the question, in terms of the difference in price between digital and rotary. It depends. From our side, I would say that, from my knowledge, it depends where you produce it. So, for example, in Japan, when we have operations too, and then we have a big business there, we produce there, and then, funny or not, we still don't know. Well, we know why, because I have seen the factories there. Main business is rotary, and the price of digital in Japan is very expensive. So it's a big difference between one price and the other one. So then, obviously, there you have a big issue. The brands have a big issue when you talk about digitally produced. In China, in Asia, they are getting closer. But then I would say that, from my humble opinion, it's in Europe. I think the difference, for example, is less. Is less between digital and rotary. At the end, when you put it, if you look at it from only a printing cost, then always will be a difference. In the small quantities, not. It depends. Each company, I think that in their source, they will have different steps. And then, but we know that for big quantities, always rotary will remain cheaper in the print cost. But at the moment that you put, as Nick was saying, waste, and then you put logistics, because it's not the same if you print to China and then you have to bring it here, and then you need the 12 weeks of production in China, plus the boat, plus everything, because if you go so much at cost, you cannot air freight the goods. You have to put it in a boat, and this turns 8 weeks of boat, plus the production, plus the line that you have to wait until the production puts you in the place. Maybe you look for a more close production. We are talking close to us, so in Europe, and then you do it, doesn't matter where, in which country. Yes, you pay more for the printing cost. Actually, yes, the brand director is going to say it's more expensive, but the logistics are cheaper. And
you have to look at, you have to get your clever financial director in there and look at the true total cost, don't you? Which is not just the variable printing cost per meter. It includes, obviously, transport, but most importantly, I would suggest it includes stockholding and, very obviously, dormancy. I mean, some of the dormancy figures that are being announced by some of these big chains are horrendous. I mean, that is stock that's going straight in the dustbin, that's being written off, it's got zero value. That's a big cost.
It depends, Nick. It depends on the strategy at the end. There is companies that they go with an Excel file and they say, how much is the print cost? Oof, I do it somewhere else. And then is other, and to get the printing price, they are able to commit with 500,000 meters. Doesn't matter what is the million meters. Obviously, all this, I think that will change for more that, no, what I need is 100,000 meters. What is the price? Sometimes people chases the price and then they keep putting, coins or volume on the order. Some others will decide, no, this is what I want, and then I prefer to repeat. That is when, obviously, the advantage is going to be that. I think that fashion goes in that way today.
Yeah, but if you're the financial director and you're used to looking at 6 months worth of stock on your balance sheet, I'm sure you can think of nice things that you could do with that money if you didn't have to hold 6 months of stock.
Absolutely.
Yeah. 100%. Guys, we do have a final question here. I appreciate that everyone's taken a lot of time out, but we still got 54 people watching us. So let's get to this final one. So it's a bit of a long one, but look, in my experience with digital printing, the color management is not an issue at all. Colors always come out great. However, the issue that I really noticed is maintaining garment sizing. We design the garment shape, sleeves, front, back, along with its print, so that the prints match at the sides and the garment is easier to cut. But the manufacturers are always saying that they cannot guarantee exact shrinkage. It feels a bit absurd in 2020 since, if designers are given a shrinkage percentage, it should be coming out of the printing machine in almost perfect match, rather than all of a sudden turning into a size XS when it should have been a size M. Do you have any solutions for this? I guess, first of all, is that something that you guys also see within digital printing as well? Is that something that you're aware of, that there's a sort of shrinkage going on, and are there solutions for it? Alex, I'll just come to you first, if that's right.
I would say that we are in the production part so we are not in manufacturing. So what we know is, first, is the consistency of what you are producing. So always the fabric is going to shrink, but people, I will talk for ourselves, but I think that should be the normality in the industry, that there is a technical sheet that tells you how much is the shrinkage that one fabric can achieve, can perform. Always this is the tolerance on that. It depends of each fabric that has this shrinkage, and then you produce on that. This should always, if you do it correctly, should always, if the production is done correctly, should always be inside of these parameters. The solution will be that the manufacturer or the garment or the production unit should test the fabric in each lot, and that this fabric complies with the performance or the technical sheet that this fabric is sold on. Then this is the only way I would say that to try to avoid it. Always there is a small differences, because I always say that textiles is not producing mirrors, so it's every lot it changes. So it's a natural fibers in most of the cases, and it's industrial process, so always is a tolerance there.
Yeah, it's all about consistency, isn't it? You want, so this, in the context of the larger discussion we're having, it favors greater control. You can only really get into this technology whether your problem is trying to fix color shift, or in this case shrinkage shift. The answer is you need consistent manufacturing, and as Alex says, that leads, you establish standards, you then make sure that the standards are followed, and the whole of our system is built on putting data into the system to predict what will happen, and that includes shrinkage. But the data is only as good as the process that's followed. So if there's no point saying, yeah, well, this is what happened last time, if actually the process is so inconsistent that what happens next time might be very different. And so that favors, I mean, Alex is obviously speaking from the relatively strong standpoint of someone who has a great deal of control over his manufacturing, because a lot of it he actually owns and manages, which is not the case of many people, obviously. But I do think that if the industry is going to move more towards the technology approach rather than the trial and error and throw lots of stuff away, and then the answer is going to be tighter technical relationships with a smaller number of suppliers. And that would apply equally to the question that we've been asked, shrinkage, managing shrinkage, just as it applies to managing color shift.
I would agree with that 100%. It's all about best practice. It's all about following set procedure and sticking to standards. It's about knowing your suppliers really well, whether you're a digital printer or buying ink, or whether you're a digital printer buying fabric and sourcing fabrics for yourselves. You have to understand and know, have some understanding of textile technology, and as Alex said, follow the text sheet. And for large or even small volume production, there are certain fabrics which can always be a little bit more temperamental than others, but as a textile professional, you know which ones those are, so you can balance and implement the correct procedures. That if those are followed, then yes, as Alex said, especially in the cellulose route, textiles are of organic nature and can change their characteristics depend on the cotton yield, the harvest. There are so many different things, humidity, 1,000 things that can just change those variances slightly. And it's exactly the same on the polyester side as well, depending on how they were woven, how the fibers were spun, how it was it's heat setting, lots and lots of different things. But in a pure technical environment, all of those things can be measured and they can all be controlled. And it's again, always comes down to communication of technology, doesn't it, really? And having really close relationships and asking the right questions of your suppliers, wherever they are in your supply chain.
I guess the final question to be asked is to revert back to the beginning and Luke's point. Is now the time? Do these potential benefits make it worth sort of overcoming these remaining obstacles and pushing forward with digital transformation? That's not just printing digitally or investigating that, but that's employing the right processes, people, and technologies in your company to make it through this crisis and the next one that will inevitably come. Debbie, I'll come to you first on that.
I have to say yes, don't I? I am the ultimate digital evangelist. So yeah, this is most definitely the right time to change and adopt whichever parts of your supply chain you can adapt. You really have to start to adapt digital technologies, or ultimately people are going to get left behind. This isn't going to go away. It's going to keep advancing all the way through. They're all incredibly sustainable technologies, and every portion of that design journey, from design all the way through to production, that can be digitized and to a new format to aid climate change, etc., has to be adopted for efficient manufacturing.
Alex, would you come in on that, sort of closing remarks?
Yes, I will just second what Debbie is saying. It's although that we perform both technologies, it's true that you see that digital has too many pros. So it's sustainable. You don't have waste. It's faster. It's easy to manage with the proper technology, and gives you flexibility. And then you rely less on the work on the human part of it from a production point of view than the normal preparation of the software. I think that you have more flexibility and less quantity. I think that for what the fashion is today, that the big quantities are over at least what is not fast fashion. I think that digital is here to keep biting the market of the analog production, and we need to learn, we need to adapt, and then like it or not, the only last thing that remains is the penetration, and then at least from ourselves, it's what we see, and we are already achieving that. In digital, we have the same penetration in many fabrics than the rotary, so you cannot even see the difference. Then it's something that it's a win-win.
Yeah. And Nick?
Yeah, I think it's there, isn't it? It's there for the taking. And I think those drivers are all the financial, the sustainability, and the supply chain security, which, as we discussed in the beginning, have to some extent have always been there, but are now perhaps stronger than ever. And what, of course, wasn't there. I mean, let's not forget, nobody's suggesting that the brand owners acted totally irrationally when they made the decisions to offshore so many years ago, because the key thing, which is what we've been talking about today, is the enabling technology, and the enabling technology is new. I mean, it really wasn't here 5 years ago. But I would say, yes, there is something for, obviously, every business is different. Every value-added chain is different. The products, the prices are different. But there is something there for everyone, because any business, even if they're still producing nearly everything analog printed in Asia, the digital sampling process, which can then get moved through to extended market trials, could benefit almost every business I've ever come across. And that is simple stuff with very small scale investment in small, slow textile printers. At the other end of the scale, and the kind of stuff that we're talking about, the more radical stuff, could some of the big guys look at partial onshoring and hybrid manufacturing strategies? I think they'll all be looking at it, and for some of them, the numbers will add up. Because I think the two big numbers, one of which is easy to quantify, is they know how much dormancy they have at the moment. They know what their stockholding costs are at the moment. That's the easy bit. But the other bit, which is there, which is perhaps less easy to quantify, but is definitely real, is that if you start doing more extended digitally based market trials in your flagship stores, before you hit the bulk production button, you are going to sell more, as well as reducing dormancy. You've got a more targeted, responsive design and production line. You know, the designers can produce something and they can produce it in 20 colorways, and maybe 3 of those colorways are going to be the real big hits. But until now, it was somebody's educated guess, somebody's experienced guess, but they weren't going to get it right. If they had the data from a number of flagship stores that said, right, well, it's clear, these are the 3 that you can put all 20 in the store off the back of a very small digital production run. And yeah, right, these are clearly the 3 that are going to outsell the other 17. Right, off to Asia to manufacture them. I mean, I think that, and those are so that there are big pluses. It's not just about taking cost out of the business. It's also, there's potentially the people who get this right are going to have a more responsive demand, and basic marketing knowledge would suggest they're going to sell more than the people who don't do that as well.
Yeah, it's profit making.
Yeah.
Well, look, thank you so much, Debbie, Alex, Nick, and Luke as well, for his presentation earlier on. It's been an absolute pleasure. There are some other questions which I'm going to forward to you individually. But apart from that, thanks so much. It's been a really, really interesting hour and a half, and I wish you all a good day.
Thank you, David, and thanks to everyone who's been listening to us.
Yes, thanks for joining us. Thank you.
Please feel free to get in touch with us individually afterwards if you have further questions or you want to follow up with anything.
Absolutely, 100%. You'll all be getting an email from us with sort of the video and all of that, and contact details for everyone. So look out for that. Until then, have a lovely day, and all the best.
Yep. Thank you. Good luck for everyone.